The sharp crack of a gunshot echoed across the Montana wilderness just as Clara Fletcher caught sight of the small figure huddled by the trail. A sound that made her instinctively duck before realizing the shot came from miles away, likely a hunter seeking game in the foothills. It was September 1878, and the promise of autumn painted the landscape in burnished gold, though Clara had little time to appreciate the beauty as she reined in her mare upon spotting what appeared to be a child sitting alone beside the dusty trail that wound its way toward Helena. Clara had been riding since dawn, her back aching from the journey as she returned from visiting her ailing aunt in the neighboring town. At 22, she had grown accustomed to making these solitary journeys across Montana territory, having learned self-reliance out of necessity after her parents' passing 3 years prior. The small homestead she now managed alone awaited her just 5 miles ahead, but the sight before her demanded immediate attention. As she drew closer, the pitiful sounds of crying reached her ears. A small girl, no more than 4 or 5 years old, sat hunched with her face buried in her knees, her thin shoulders shaking with each sob. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands around a dirt-smudged face, and her simple cotton dress was torn and filthy. Without hesitation, Clara dismounted, tying her horse to a nearby scrub oak before approaching slowly. "Hello there," she called softly, not wanting to startle the child. "Are you hurt, little one?" The girl's head snapped up, revealing tear-streaked cheeks and eyes wide with fear. She scrambled backward like a frightened animal, looking ready to bolt. "It's all right," Clara said, immediately dropping to her knees in the dust of the trail. She made herself smaller, less threatening, and stayed perfectly still. "I won't harm you. My name is Clara. Are you lost?" The child stared at her, trembling visibly. After a long moment, she gave a tiny nod. "Where are your parents?" Clara asked gently, though something in the girl's hollow gaze already told her the answer would break her heart. "Gone," the child whispered, her voice raspy as though she hadn't spoken in days. "Mama got sick, Papa too, they wouldn't wake up." Clara's chest tightened. Cholera had swept through parts of the territory that summer, leaving devastation in its wake. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Faith," came the barely audible reply. "That's a beautiful name," Clara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Are you hungry, Faith? I have some bread and jerky in my saddlebag." At the mention of food, the girl's eyes widened further, and she nodded with such desperate eagerness that Clara felt tears threaten. She reached slowly into her bag and produced a cloth-wrapped bundle containing her lunch. As she unwrapped it and offered a piece of bread, Faith crept forward cautiously, snatching it from her hand before retreating again. Clara watched the child devour the food, clearly starving. "How long have you been out here alone, Faith?" Between bites, Faith held up 3 fingers. 3 days. Clara gasped, horror washing through her. "Oh, you poor thing." As Faith ate, Clara's mind raced. The nearest town was hours away and darkness would fall soon. She couldn't leave this child here, but she also couldn't ignore the fact that there might be family searching for her. She was so deep in thought that she nearly missed the sound of approaching hoofbeats until they were upon her. A man on horseback rounded the bend in the trail, slowing his mount when he spotted Clara kneeling beside Faith. The stranger was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and watchful eyes beneath the brim of his worn hat. A gun belt hung at his hip, and his clothes bore the dust and grime of long travel. Clara instinctively shifted to place herself between Faith and the newcomer, one hand reaching for the small derringer hidden in her boot, a precaution her father had insisted upon before his death. "Afternoon, madam," the man called, keeping a respectful distance as he tipped his hat. His voice carried a slight drawl, though not the deep southern kind. "Everything all right here. We're managing," Clara replied carefully, studying him. He didn't look like an outlaw, but she'd learned that appearances meant little in these parts. The man dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. Leading his horse, a handsome chestnut gelding, he approached slowly. "Name's Wade Wilson," he offered. "I've been tracking wagon wheel marks and small footprints for the past day and a half." His gaze moved to Faith, who had shrunk back behind Clara. Been looking for survivors from a homestead that got hit by sickness about 20 miles east. Clara's wariness eased slightly. This is Faith. She says her parents didn't wake up. The man named Wade nodded grimly. The Miller's place. Found it yesterday. They were good people. He crouched down to Faith's level, though still keeping enough distance not to frighten her. Hello there, Faith. Your pa and I used to trade horses sometimes. I'm mighty sorry about what happened. Faith regarded him silently, clutching her piece of jerky. Are you a lawman? Clara asked, noticing the badge partially hidden by his duster. Wade nodded. Deputy out of Helena. When word came about sickness at the Miller place, I rode out, found the parents but no child, been searching since. She's been out here for 3 days, Clara said, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. How could no one have found this child sooner? If Wade took offense, he didn't show it. Territory's big, madam, too big sometimes. He glanced at the darkening sky. Night's coming fast. My cabin's about 4 miles west of here. You're welcome to shelter there tonight. Tomorrow we can take the girl into Helena, see if she's got any kin. Clara hesitated. She didn't know this man, deputy badge or not, and years of frontier living had taught her caution. Yet Faith needed proper shelter, and the child had already been through too much to spend another night exposed to the elements and wild animals. I have my own homestead not far from here, she said finally. 5 miles north, Faith and I will head there. Wade frowned slightly. With respect, madam, those clouds building to the west spell trouble. Storms coming in fast, not sure you'd make it before it hits. As if to emphasize his point, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. Clara looked down at Faith, who had begun to tremble again. Whether from fear of the approaching storm or exhaustion, she couldn't tell. You can keep your gun handy if it makes you feel safer, Wade added quietly, having noticed her hand still hovering near her boot. But that little one needs warmth and shelter soon. Clara met his gaze, searching for any sign of deceit or malice, but found only genuine concern. With a reluctant nod, she agreed. All right, Mr. Wilson, we'll accept your offer of shelter for tonight. Relief crossed his face. My cabin's not much, but it's sturdy. Storm won't touch us there. He turned to Faith and asked gently, Think you can ride with me, little one? My horse Copper is real gentle. Faith looked at Clara questioningly, seeking reassurance. It's all right, Clara told her, though her own heart still harbored doubt. We'll stay together. The journey to Wade's cabin was tense at first. Clara rode her mare while Faith sat perched in front of Wade on his horse. The child remained rigid with fear initially, but as they traveled, Clara noticed her gradually relaxing against the deputy's chest, fatigue finally overcoming wariness. By the time the first heavy raindrops began to fall, Faith was asleep in Wade's protective grip. The cabin appeared just as the storm broke in earnest, a sturdy log structure nestled against a backdrop of pine trees. A small corral stood adjacent to a lean-to stable, and smoke curled from the stone chimney, suggesting Wade had left a banked fire when he departed. You have someone staying here? Clara asked, immediately alert. Wade shook his head as he dismounted carefully, cradling the sleeping Faith. No, madam, just left the fire smoldering this morning, force of habit in this country. Once inside, Clara was surprised by the cabin's neatness. It was simple but well kept, with a main room containing a table, chairs, and a cook stove, plus a small bedroom visible through an open door. Various pelts adorned the walls, and a bookshelf held an impressive collection for a frontier lawman. You can take the bedroom, Wade said, gently laying Faith on a buffalo robe near the fireplace. I'll sleep out here. Thank you, Clara replied, some of her suspicion fading as she watched him tenderly tuck a blanket around Faith's small form. There was a gentleness to his movements that contradicted his rough exterior. While Wade tended to the horses, Clara explored the cabin more thoroughly. Besides books on law and history, she found volumes of poetry and even a dog-eared copy of Little Women. On the mantel sat a carved wooden horse of exquisite craftsmanship, and beside it, a faded photograph of a woman with a kind smile. When Wade returned, rain-soaked and bringing in a gust of cold air, he caught her studying the photograph. My mother, he explained quietly, hanging his dripping hat and coat by the door. Passed 5 years ago back in Kansas. I'm sorry, Clara said sincerely. I lost my parents 3 years ago, influenza. Wade nodded in understanding as he stoked the fire. Territory's hard on folks. Takes more than it gives sometimes. As the evening progressed, Clara found herself increasingly at ease in Wade's presence. He moved efficiently around the cabin, preparing a simple but hearty stew that filled the space with savory aromas. When Faith woke, disoriented and frightened, it was Wade who calmed her with a soft-spoken story about his horse while Clara prepared a bath using water heated on the stove. Later, after Faith had been bathed, fed, and tucked into the bedroom bed wearing one of Wade's shirts as a nightgown, comically oversized but clean, Clara rejoined him by the fire. The storm raged outside, rain lashing against the windows and thunder shaking the very foundations, but inside was warmth and unexpected comfort. "What will happen to her?" Clara asked, accepting the cup of coffee Wade offered. He sighed, settling into a chair across from her. "Depends if she has any kin willing to take her, if not." He didn't finish, but Clara knew what went unsaid. Orphanages were overcrowded and life for parentless children was rarely kind. "She seems to trust you," Clara observed, "more than I would have expected after what she's been through." Wade smiled faintly. Children know, they can sense who means them harm and who doesn't. He studied his coffee. "Had a little sister once. She would have been about your age now." Clara waited, sensing there was more to the story. "Lost her and my pa in a Comanche raid when I was 15, he continued quietly. "That's what brought my mother and me north eventually." "I'm sorry," Clara said again, understanding now his gentle manner with Faith. "Is that why you became a lawman?" Wade nodded. "Figured maybe I could protect others since I couldn't protect them." He shifted, changing the subject. "What about you? You mentioned a homestead. You work it alone." "Since my parents died," Clara confirmed. "It's not much, 40 acres, a small house, some livestock. Enough to keep me fed and independent." "That's no small feat for anyone, let alone a woman on her own," Wade remarked, genuine respect in his voice. Clara lifted her chin slightly. "Women are stronger than most men give us credit for, Mr. Wilson." "Wade," he corrected with a smile that transformed his serious face. "And I learned that lesson from my mother, who ran our farm single-handedly after we lost Pa." They talked late into the night as the storm continued its assault. Clara learned that Wade had been a deputy for 3 years, that he had served briefly in the army before that, and that he had built this cabin with his own hands. She found herself sharing stories of her own life, the challenges of maintaining her homestead, her love of raising horses, even her dream of someday expanding her land to create a proper horse breeding operation. It was well past midnight when Clara finally retired to check on Faith. The child slept peacefully, her small face relaxed for the first time since Clara had found her. Watching her, Clara felt a protective surge that surprised her with its intensity. In just hours, this orphan child had worked her way into Clara's heart. The next morning dawned clear and washed clean by the storm. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon and the sound of Faith's laughter, a sound she hadn't heard before. Dressing quickly, she emerged to find the child sitting at the table while Wade flipped flapjacks with theatrical flourishes that had Faith giggling with delight. "Good morning," Clara said, smiling at the unexpected scene. Wade looked up, and something in his expression made Clara's heart flutter strangely. "Morning. Hope we didn't wake you. Faith here was helping me cook breakfast." Faith nodded proudly, holding up hands sticky with batter. "I'm mixed." The domestic tableau struck Clara forcefully. In another life, this could be a family scene: husband, wife, child starting their day together. The thought came unbidden and unsettled her. After breakfast, they prepared to make the journey to Helena. Faith, now wearing a dress Wade had produced from a trunk, belonged to the daughter of a friend, kept meaning to return it, clung to Clara's hand while watching Wade saddle the horses. "It's about 3 hours to town," Wade explained as he lifted Faith onto his horse. "There's an older couple there, the Hendersons, who sometimes take in children who have lost their parents. Good people." They might be willing to give Faith a temporary home while the authorities search for any relatives. Clara nodded, though the thought of leaving Faith with strangers, even kind ones, troubled her. The child had already endured so much abandonment. She kept these thoughts to herself as they set out, the morning sun warming their backs. The journey to Helena passed quickly, with Wade pointing out landmarks and sharing stories that kept Faith engaged and Clara intrigued. He knew the territory intimately, from the best places to ford streams to which ridges harbored mountain lion dens to be avoided. Clara found herself impressed not only by his knowledge, but by his evident love for this wild country. Helena had grown substantially since Clara's last visit, the gold rush having transformed what was once a mining camp into a bustling town with proper buildings replacing many of the earlier tents and shacks. Wade led them down the main street, acknowledging greetings from various townspeople with a tip of his hat. At the sheriff's office, a grizzled older man looked up from his desk as they entered. "Wilson, about time you showed up, was about to send out a search party for the search party." His eyes moved to Clara and Faith. "I see you found what you were looking for. Sheriff Holbrook, this is Miss Clara Fletcher and Faith Miller," Wade introduced them. "The Miller's place was hit by cholera. Both parents passed. Faith here managed to wander off before succumbing." The sheriff's weathered face softened as he looked at Faith, who had partially hidden herself behind Clara's skirts. "Poor little thing. Mighty lucky you found her, Wilson." "Actually, Miss Fletcher found her first," Wade corrected. "She was tending to the child when I came upon them." Sheriff Holbrook nodded respectfully to Clara. "That's so. Well, madam, you did a good thing. Too many folks these days would just ride on by." "I could never," Clara said firmly, placing a protective hand on Faith's shoulder. As Wade and the sheriff discussed the situation, Clara knelt beside Faith. "It's going to be all right," she assured the child, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "These men will help find you a good home." Faith's large eyes filled with tears. "Want to stay with you," she whispered, clinging to Clara's hand. The words pierced Clara's heart. In just one day, this child had become attached to her, and if she were honest with herself, the feeling was mutual. Before she could respond, Wade rejoined them. "Sheriff's sending telegrams to nearby towns to check for any Miller relatives," he explained. "In the meantime, I thought we might visit the Hendersons, see if they have room for Faith temporarily." The Hendersons' home sat on the outskirts of town, a modestly sized house with a well-tended garden and chickens scratching in the yard. Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with silver hair and kind eyes, welcomed them warmly, especially after Wade explained the situation. "Of course we can take the little dear," she assured them, offering Faith a freshly baked cookie. "We've got 2 other children staying with us at present, both boys, but there's always room for one more," while Faith cautiously explored the Hendersons' parlor under Mrs. Henderson's watchful eye, Clara stepped outside with Wade. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard as they stood in uncomfortable silence. "They seem like good people," Clara finally said. Wade nodded. "They are. They've helped dozens of children over the years." "Then why does leaving her feel so wrong?" The words escaped before Clara could stop them. Wade studied her face. "Because you care. Because in the short time you've known her, she's become important to you." Clara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm day. "I should return to my homestead. The animals will need tending." "I'll ride with you," Wade offered immediately. "It's a long journey to make alone." "I've made it many times before," Clara reminded him, though the offer tempted her more than she cared to admit. "I know you're capable," Wade said, "but I'd feel better seeing you home safe." Clara hesitated, then nodded her acceptance. They returned inside to say their goodbyes to Faith, a process that proved heart-wrenching when the child clung to Clara, sobbing. "I'll come visit you," Clara promised, fighting back her own tears. "Very soon." As they rode away, Clara found herself repeatedly looking back until the Henderson house disappeared from view. The emptiness she felt was disproportionate to the brief time she'd known Faith, yet undeniable. "She'll be all right," Wade said quietly. "The Hendersons will take good care of her." "I know," Clara replied. "It's just..." She trailed off, unable to articulate the sense of loss. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing counterpoint to Clara's troubled thoughts. When they stopped to rest by a creek, Wade surprised her by asking, "Have you ever thought about taking in a child yourself?" Clara looked up sharply. "What?" "You have a homestead, stability, a good heart," Wade said, handing her a canteen. "Just wondering if you'd considered it." Clara paused. The truth was, she had sometimes dreamed of children, but always in the context of a family with a husband. "I'm not sure a single woman would be permitted to adopt." Wade considered this. "Perhaps not formally, but out here in the territories, things happen differently than back east. People take in those who need homes. Communities form in unexpected ways." Clara studied him curiously. "You sound like you've given this some thought." A faint flush colored Wade's tanned cheeks. "I've seen a lot of orphaned children in my work. Always wished I could do more than just find them temporary arrangements." The conversation lingered in Clara's mind as they continued their journey. By the time they reached her homestead, a modest cabin with a barn, corral, and small garden, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "You've done well here," Wade commented as they dismounted. The admiration in his voice was evident as he surveyed her property. "Thank you," Clara replied, a hint of pride warming her voice. "It's not grand, but it's mine." After tending to the horses and the other animals that had greeted Clara's return with enthusiastic demands for food, she invited Wade to stay for supper, an invitation he accepted with obvious pleasure. Inside, her cabin felt strangely empty without Faith's presence, though the child had never actually been there. As Clara prepared a simple meal, Wade built a fire in the hearth and repaired a loose shutter he'd noticed, moving with the ease of a man accustomed to making himself useful. Their conversation over dinner flowed naturally, touching on everything from local politics to Wade's most unusual cases as a deputy. Clara found herself laughing more than she had in months, perhaps years, and watching Wade's face animate with stories made something warm unfurl inside her chest. When it came time for him to leave, Clara found herself reluctant to see him go. They stood in her doorway, the night sky brilliant with stars above them. "Thank you for seeing me home," she said, "and for everything you did for Faith." Wade nodded, his hat in his hands. "I'll check on her regularly, make sure she's settling in well with the Hendersons." "I'd appreciate knowing how she fares," Clara replied. Perhaps you could let me know when you're next in the area." A smile touched Wade's lips. "I'd like that very much, Miss Fletcher." "Clara," she corrected, returning his smile. "I think after everything you can call me Clara." "Clara," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "Good night, then." She watched him ride away, a silhouette against the star-strewn sky, and felt as though something significant had shifted in her carefully ordered life. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara threw herself into work on her homestead, trying to ignore the persistent thoughts of both Faith and Wade that occupied her mind. She repaired fencing, preserved the last of her garden's harvest for winter, and began breaking a spirited young mare, all tasks that should have left her too exhausted for contemplation. Yet still she found herself wondering how Faith was adjusting and when Wade might return. Her answer came unexpectedly one crisp October afternoon as she was chopping wood for the approaching winter. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up, shielding her eyes against the sun to see a familiar figure approaching. Wade rode with the same easy grace she remembered, but it was the small figure seated before him that made Clara drop her axe and rush forward. "Faith!" she cried as Wade reined in his horse. The child's face lit up with recognition and joy. "Miss Clara," she called, already squirming to get down. Wade lifted her carefully to the ground, and Faith ran to Clara, who knelt to receive her embrace. The child felt solid and real in her arms, no longer the frightened waif she'd found by the trail. "What a wonderful surprise," Clara said, looking up at Wade, who had dismounted and was watching them with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Faith has been asking about you daily," he explained. "Mrs. Henderson suggested a visit might lift her spirits. Hope that's all right." "More than all right," Clara assured him, standing with Faith's hand firmly in hers. How long can you stay? Wade's expression turned slightly apologetic. Just for today, I'm afraid, need to have her back by nightfall. Despite the brevity of the visit, the day unfolded as one of the most pleasant Clara could remember. She showed Faith around the homestead, introduced her to the animals, and even let her collect eggs from the chicken coop, a task that resulted in more broken shells than intact eggs, but brought such delight to Faith's face that Clara couldn't possibly mind. Wade, meanwhile, once again made himself useful, fixing a leaky roof on the barn that Clara had been putting off addressing. They shared a picnic lunch under the sprawling oak tree beside the cabin, and Clara found herself repeatedly catching Wade's eye across Faith's chattering presence, sharing silent moments of connection that made her heart beat faster. As the afternoon waned, Faith grew increasingly subdued, clearly dreading the moment of departure. When it was time to leave, she clung to Clara with renewed desperation. "Don't want to go," she sobbed. "Want to stay with you." Clara fought her own tears as she gently disentangled Faith's arms. "I know, sweetheart, I wish you could stay too, but the Hendersons are taking good care of you, aren't they?" Faith nodded reluctantly. "They're nice, but they're not you." The simple statement nearly broke Clara's resolve. She looked up to find Wade watching them, his expression troubled. "We'll visit again," he promised Faith, "and perhaps Miss Clara can come to town to see you as well." This compromise somewhat soothed Faith's distress, and soon they were mounted and ready to depart. As Wade turned his horse, he looked back at Clara. "I'll return tomorrow if that's agreeable," he said. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Curiosity flared within Clara. "I'll be here," she replied. That night, Clara slept poorly, her mind cycling through possibilities of what Wade might want to discuss. By morning, she had convinced herself of everything from bad news about Faith's relatives being found to Wade announcing his imminent departure from the territory. She was therefore unprepared for what he actually proposed when he arrived shortly after noon. They sat at her kitchen table, steaming cups of coffee between them, when Wade leaned forward with unusual intensity. "I've been thinking about Faith," he began, "and about what you said regarding a single woman not being permitted to adopt." Clara nodded, uncertain where this was leading. "What if you weren't single?" Wade continued, his voice low and earnest. Clara's breath caught. "I don't understand." Wade took a deep breath. "I know this is sudden and perhaps I'm overstepping, but I've not been able to stop thinking about you since we met. About how you knelt in the dust to comfort a frightened child without hesitation. About your strength in maintaining this place alone. About your kindness and your laugh." He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "I'm not proposing marriage based solely on Faith's situation, though I believe we could offer her the home she deserves. I'm proposing because in the short time I've known you, Clara Fletcher, I've come to admire you more than any woman I've ever met." Clara stared at him, speechless. Of all the scenarios she had imagined, this had not been among them. "I know it's sudden," Wade repeated, looking increasingly uncertain as her silence lengthened. "And I would understand completely if you need time or if your answer is no, but I wanted you to know where I stand." Clara finally found her voice. "Wade, we barely know each other." "I know," he acknowledged. "But I also know that out here life moves differently than back east. People come together quickly sometimes because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. I've seen enough death to understand that waiting for the perfect moment often means waiting forever." His honesty struck Clara deeply. There was truth in his words. Life on the frontier was uncertain and often brief, yet marriage was not a step to be taken lightly, regardless of where one lived. "What about your work as a deputy?" she asked. "What about my homestead? Have you considered the practical aspects at all?" Wade nodded. "I have. I've been saving to buy land of my own. My funds combined with what you've built here could create something substantial, especially for your horse breeding dreams. As for being a deputy, I could continue serving in that capacity while also working the land. Many men do both." The thought he had given to their potential future together surprised and touched Clara. Still, she hesitated. "And Faith, what if relatives are found? Then we would wish her well with her family," Wade said seriously. but if none are found, we could petition to adopt her legally. A married couple with land and means would stand a good chance of approval. Clara rose from the table, needing space to think. She moved to the window, gazing out at the land she had fought so hard to maintain on her own. The prospect of sharing that burden was appealing, as was the thought of faith running freely across those fields. And Wade himself, his steady presence, his kindness, his evident respect for her independence, all these things drew her to him in a way she hadn't experienced before. "This isn't how I imagined this happening," she admitted finally, turning back to face him. "In my girlhood dreams, there was a long courtship, flowers, poetry." Wade stood, crossing to her. "I can't offer you the courtship that should have preceded this proposal. But I can promise you that if you say yes, I will spend every day forward attempting to court you properly as my wife. The flowers, the poetry, all of it, just perhaps in a different order than tradition dictates." A smile tugged at Clara's lips despite herself. "You're very persuasive, Deputy Wilson. Only when I believe in what I'm fighting for," he replied softly. Clara looked up into his face, honest, open, hopeful, and made her decision. "I won't say yes today," she said, watching his expression fall slightly before she continued. "But I won't say no either. I'm proposing a compromise." Wade's eyebrows raised. "I'm listening." "1 month," Clara said firmly. "You continue your visits when your duties permit. We learn more about each other. We both spend time with Faith. At the end of that month, if we both still feel this could work, then I'll accept your proposal." The smile that spread across Wade's face was answer enough before he even spoke. "That seems more than fair, though I should warn you, my mind won't change." "We shall see," Clara replied, though her heart was already racing with possibilities. True to his word, Wade visited regularly over the following weeks. Sometimes he brought Faith with him, and those days were filled with laughter and the kind of domestic harmony Clara had not experienced since her parents' deaths. Other times he came alone, and they talked for hours, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures, discovering both differences and surprising commonalities. Clara learned that Wade had a talent for woodworking, evidenced by the carved animals he brought for Faith and the practical improvements he made around Clara's homestead. He learned that Clara had a beautiful singing voice she rarely shared with others, and that she kept a journal filled with poetry of her own creation. They discovered a shared love of literature, often reading aloud to each other in the evenings before the fire. There were disagreements too, Wade's occasional overprotectiveness clashing with Clara's fierce independence. Differences of opinion on how certain aspects of the homestead should be managed, but these conflicts were navigated with growing mutual respect and compromise. As the month neared its end, Clara found herself both anticipating and dreading the moment of decision. The practical reasons for accepting Wade's proposal were clear. Together they could provide Faith with a loving home, their combined resources would strengthen the homestead, and there was comfort in having a partner to face life's hardships. But it was the less tangible reasons that increasingly occupied her thoughts, the way her pulse quickened when Wade appeared on the horizon, the comfortable silences they could share, the feeling of rightness when the three of them were together. The day of decision arrived with the first snowfall of the season, fat flakes drifting lazily from a pewter sky. Clara woke early, watching the transformation of her land through frosted window panes. She had made her choice days ago, in truth, but still felt the weight of what she was about to commit to. Wade arrived at noon, his horse's hooves crunching through the fresh snow. He dismounted slowly, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension as he approached the cabin. Clara met him on the porch, wrapped in a heavy shawl against the cold. "You came," she said, though she had never doubted he would. "I gave my word," he replied simply, removing his hat. Snowflakes immediately began gathering in his dark hair. They stood looking at each other for a long moment before Clara broke the silence. "Our month is up," Wade nodded, his breath visible in the cold air. "It is. Have you reached a decision, Clara?" Instead of answering directly, Clara asked, "Did you bring the paperwork for Faith?" Wade's expression faltered slightly, perhaps interpreting this as deflection. I did. Sheriff Holbrook helped me obtain the necessary documents. If you've decided against my proposal, I understand, but I hope you might still consider— Yes, Clara interrupted. Wade stopped mid-sentence. Yes. Yes, Clara repeated, a smile spreading across her face despite her attempt at composure. Yes to your proposal. Yes to creating a home for Faith. Yes to building a life together. The transformation of Wade's expression was something Clara knew she would remember for the rest of her days, surprise giving way to joy so pure it seemed to illuminate him from within. In 2 strides he was before her, gathering her hands in his. Are you certain? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Clara nodded. I've never been more certain of anything. I've spent my life being practical, cautious, self-reliant to a fault. But these past weeks have shown me that sometimes the heart knows what it wants before the head has time to make its calculations. She squeezed his hands. I want this, I want you, I want us to be a family with Faith. Wade's response was to draw her into his arms, his embrace warm and solid against the falling snow. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that left Clara breathless and certain she had made the right choice. When can we tell Faith? She asked when they finally parted. Wade's smile widened. Immediately. She's with the Hendersons now, but I hoped we might ride into town tomorrow and share the news, if your answer was yes. The following day dawned clear and cold, the world transformed into a glistening white expanse under the bright winter sun. Clara and Wade rode side by side into Helena, their conversation flowing easily between practical wedding plans and excited speculation about Faith's reaction. At the Hendersons' home, Faith's response exceeded even their highest hopes. When they explained that they wished to marry and make her a part of their family permanently, the child's eyes grew round with wonder. You mean I'll live with both of you, forever? She asked, looking from one to the other. Forever, Clara confirmed, kneeling to embrace her. If that's what you want. Faith's answer was to throw her arms around Clara's neck with such force that she nearly toppled them both. Yes, 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 she exclaimed, then reaching out to include Wade in the embrace, Mrs. Henderson, watching from the doorway with misty eyes, declared it the happiest outcome she could have imagined. The necessary paperwork was signed that very day, with Sheriff Holbrook and the Hendersons serving as witnesses to both the adoption petition and the marriage license application. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in Helena's small church, a simple ceremony attended by the handful of friends Clara and Wade had between them. Faith stood proudly beside them, holding a posy of dried flowers and wearing a new dress Clara had worked late into the night to finish. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Faith was the first to cheer, her joy infectious as the small congregation applauded. Their return to the homestead, now truly their shared home, was accompanied by a sense of rightness that settled deep in Clara's soul. That first evening as a family, they sat before the fire. Faith nestled between them as Wade read aloud from one of his books of poetry, his deep voice filling the cabin with words of love and commitment that seemed written for this very moment. As Faith drifted to sleep against her side, Clara caught Wade's gaze over the child's head. The love she saw reflected there both humbled and strengthened her. 3 strangers brought together by tragedy had somehow formed a family against all odds. Are you happy? Wade asked softly, reaching across to take her hand. Clara looked around at their home, at the child sleeping peacefully between them, at the man who had ridden into her life so unexpectedly, at the future stretching before them with all its challenges and promises, and knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. Completely, she whispered, and it was the truest word she had ever spoken. The years that followed brought both joys and hardships, as life on the frontier inevitably did. Wade continued his work as a deputy while helping expand the homestead into a successful horse breeding operation, his keen eye for horseflesh complementing Clara's natural way with the animals. Faith grew from a timid orphan into a confident young girl with her mother's determination and her father's sense of justice. 2 years after their wedding, Clara gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, who entered the world during a spring thunderstorm, nearly as dramatic as their arrival. Faith embraced her role as big sister with protective enthusiasm, declaring the babies the best present ever despite their tendency to cry through the night. By the time Faith celebrated her 10th birthday, the Wilson homestead had become one of the most prosperous in the territory. The original cabin had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Wade had finally hung up his deputy badge to focus entirely on their breeding business, though he still occasionally assisted the sheriff with particularly challenging cases. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit together on the wide porch Wade had built, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set behind the mountains. During one such evening, as Faith taught her younger siblings how to catch fireflies in the gathering dusk, Clara leaned against her husband's shoulder with a contented sigh. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked, his arm secure around her waist. Clara smiled, watching Faith's patient instruction as the twins giggled and darted after the glowing insects. "I was thinking about that day by the trail, how close I came to riding past or to refusing your offer of shelter during the storm," Wade nodded thoughtfully. "Life turns on such small moments." "It does," Clara agreed. "I never imagined that kneeling beside a crying child would lead to all of this." Wade kissed her temple gently. "I knew the moment I saw you there, your skirts in the dust, speaking so gently to a frightened orphan, that you were someone extraordinary. I just didn't know then that you would become my whole world." Clara turned to face him, still moved by his words even after years of marriage. "And I never expected that a trail-worn deputy would turn out to be the love of my life and the father of my children." Their lips met in a kiss that still held all the tenderness and passion of their early days together. Across the yard, Faith called out excitedly as she successfully helped her little brother capture a firefly in his cupped hands, her face illuminated with joy in the fading light. From a chance encounter on a dusty trail to a home filled with love and laughter, Clara couldn't have imagined such a journey. But as Wade's arm tightened around her and their children's laughter echoed across the homestead they had built together, she knew with absolute certainty that this was always where they had been headed, even before they knew it themselves.